Welcome to the Shebeen. How's it going, everybody? How are you, Lauren?
I'm all good, Barry. How are you?
I'm very good. Sunday night, 7 o'clock Eastern, midnight Irish time. You're all very welcome for a night of stories, sips, trips, all kinds of crack. We're talking about whiskey barrels and coopering and all kinds of things tonight. How are you getting on?
I'm doing the very best. I have three interesting liquids of choice in front of me this evening. I have water, I have a Red Bull, and I have a McConnell's bourbon cask finish.
Good order. Good order. I have a drop of poutine. I have a drop of water. I have a drop of Teeling 24-year-old whiskey, and I don't know how much whiskey I'll get to, but I'll definitely get to lots of water anyway as we talk about all the whiskey.
Absolutely. I see a few familiar faces joining us this evening already, which is great.
Welcome to everybody, wherever you're joining us from. Let us know what's in your glass, where you're joining us from, and what you're looking forward to drinking tonight. We've got a packed lineup that we're going to squeeze into the next 8-9 hours of talk about whiskey. We're going to focus on some Irish whiskey releases. We're going to talk about some stories and sips updates. We're going to talk about wood and barrels and casks and coopering. And we're going to reveal one of our Irish whiskey experiences that's happening in our upcoming Whiskey Bus number 3, yet to be revealed. What have I missed?
I think that's a pretty fair summary, I think, as well. And a bit about kind of what's been going on with us as well.
That's right. We've been busy. You've been out and about, which you're going to talk about a little bit of the day in the life of building an Irish Whiskey Experiences company and what you've been focused on and what we're doing to make this thing happen, right?
Absolutely. Can't count down to the website launch on the 30th of July. It's getting close.
It is getting close. Welcome to everyone who's joining us. Richard and Lloyd, Bob, Jeff, Mike, Amy, all sipping on some interesting things. Blue Spot. Johnny's got John's Lane. Powers John's Lane. Very good. Drumshambo Pot Still from Mike. Short Cross. Very good from Jeff. Inaugural Short Cross. I remember when your wife bought that bottle on our last whiskey bus. Brian Riley catching a Shebeen live for once. Amazing. Welcome, Brian. You're welcome to the crack.
Very welcome.
So, Lauren, where should we get started tonight?
Where should we get started? Well, Barry, you posted a very interesting photo on Irish Whiskey Fans of America during the week of a wedding ceremony. We'll maybe start with that one.
You know, we're in the whiskey experience business now, so whiskey extends into all facets of life. I did perform a wedding yesterday. And the couple are still married. I just checked now before we went live and all is good. But I did perform my first ever wedding as an ordained minister and it all went very well. It was kind of a whiskey themed wedding in the sense of the couple are big whiskey fans, bourbon fans, cocktail fans, of late Irish whiskey fans. And they asked about 6 months ago if I would do them the honour of marrying them. And it was a huge, huge privilege. And I hadn't been ordained myself. I'd never performed a wedding before. So went out, got ordained. It's a very complicated program of ordination that takes 3 to maybe 4 minutes online, and you pay your $40, and there's no moral examination or question about your the divinity or anything like that, or theology, and then you pay your $9 to the Secretary of State in the state you wish to perform your weddings, and you're a licensed minister. So yeah, we had a great wedding. Whiskey made a big appearance, and I brought a bottle of Redbreast 27 to the bachelor party of the groom a few weeks back, and he decided that they wanted to have that bottle at their wedding to be signed by all the guests arriving rather than a book. Everyone should sign the Redbreast 27 bottle and box because they're big whiskey fans. Yeah, it was lovely.
Was that the kind of post-ceremony dram, was it? Was that the first one everyone enjoyed? No, it wasn't. No, I wasn't bringing whiskey for 120 people. Redbreast 27 for 120 people, I can assure you. No, I may have brought a couple of sneaky drops just to ensure that the wedding party had the right whiskey. So I did bring a drop of Redbreast 14-year-old cask strength, those small batch releases a few years ago. And that was kind of sneakily passed around when it maybe shouldn't have been. But look, the statute of limitations is up on that. It was 24 hours ago now at this stage. Can't catch me now. But it was good crack. Yeah, but they're married and all went well. So the first of many. So whiskey wedding experiences might have to be added to the website in certain states in the United States. Who knows? It was so funny because you just so casually mentioned it last week. Yeah, I'm going to marry a couple during the week. And we were like, what?
Well, I was talking to somebody during the week, a distiller in Ireland, and they asked me where I'm going. So I have to go over to the States next week. And they said, oh, what are you doing over there? I said, oh, I'm marrying a couple. He said, what? I said, are you not busy enough with all the whiskey stuff? And I said, well, look, we need a backup plan. Like if this whiskey business goes belly up, we need something to fall back on. So the old ministerial duties is my backup plan should all else fail.
Sure, it's not as if you don't have a mountain of other things to be at either, just
I got nothing going on.
Another string to the bow. Speaking of things going on, Barry, there's been another few releases in the world of whiskey this week. If you want to do a run through of those.
I will. We'll talk about new whiskies. There's a couple that I'll focus on tonight. There's kind of 3 or 4 that are almost released but aren't released. So I decided to leave them out tonight. Instead, I'll just focus on the 2 that I know are released. So we'll pop them up on the screen there. And I will take down this little banner so you all can see it. Okay. So what have we got this week? Well, the first one is a Furcullen Irish whiskey. I think it's a little bit older than 3 years old, actually. That might be a little left over from a previous slide. So this is a Estate Series issue 3 of 3, the Gate Single Malt. It's actually Furcullen, which is Powerscourt Distillery in Wicklow, just south of Dublin. It's their final release in this series, the Estate Series, and it's their own whiskey distilled in County Wicklow that has been aged in both ex-bourbon barrels and then Amarone wine casks and vatted together, and that is available on the Powerscourt Distillery website. It's €75, bottled at 46% ABV. We mentioned last week that there'll be a lot more from Powerscourt as they invest in their distribution in the United States under their Furcullen Irish whiskey brand. And we got a question recently from somebody wondering why Powerscourt doesn't call their whiskey Powerscourt Irish whiskey. And the reason is because the names is too similar to Powers Irish whiskey. And the decision was made not to try and attempt to trademark something that maybe wouldn't have been granted trademark because of the similarity of names. So Furcullen is the brand name that's going out there under Powerscourt. Next up, we have, really interesting, I didn't realize it was this long. Teeling are celebrating 8 years of Dublin distilling, which is amazing because it only seems like yesterday they had released their first ever pot still from the stills in Dublin, which marked a return to pot still distilling in Dublin after 40 odd years of an absence since the closing of John's Lane and Bow Street. So 8 years, Teeling have been distilling on site in the Liberties in Dublin, and they're releasing a pot still whiskey that has been matured in bourbon barrels and then finished in Pinot de Charente wine casks. And it is being released through their website and at the distillery. 640 bottles only, 8-year-old pot still, €75. I have really enjoyed their whiskies of late, their pot stills that are coming out of the distillery. I think they're actually, as they're getting older and older, and they've got really interesting wine cask finishes, really nice whiskies. There's a fantastic pot still chestnut finish that was a winner at the Irish Whiskey Awards in November that was released for the Celtic Whiskey Shop. Great whiskey. So this one's worth checking out if you're a Teeling fan or you want a little birthday celebration. That is available from their website.
I actually couldn't believe you just said, Barry, it's been 8 years, because I visited Teeling, I think, the year after they had just reopened. So, yes, as you said, it's really, really hard to believe it's been that long, actually.
I know. And they've got older whiskies available, but now they're starting to enjoy the fruits of their labour right there in Dublin. The things like their Teeling Black Pits, their peated single malt, their own pot still whiskies, and now they're having pot still whiskies with interesting finishes. It marks a great chapter in the continuing success of Dublin distilling, which is great to see. So I'm looking forward to trying that one.
Absolutely.
That is it for the world of new releases. There are 2 others that we aren't really released as such, but we'll maybe share more information next week. One is a Powers single cask that is available to one bar in Dublin, and another one is an 8-year-old whiskey released just for the bars of the Galway Whiskey Trail in Galway, which is an interesting one. So it's a Galway Hooker single malt or Galway Hooker blended whiskey. And I don't have all the details yet, but they had a launch of it last week, and I'll get more details of that and share it with you all next week. Okay, that's it for the new whiskies.
There's a fair bit going on as well in the Stories and Sips community. The Dunville tasting, I cannot wait for that on Friday.
We do have a lot going on. Yeah, I'll give you quick updates there on the Stories and Sips side of things. So this Friday coming, July 14th, I know everyone has got their bottle by now. Those who ordered it, our 19-year-old single malt. We're going to taste that with Jarlath Watson, Ecklandville Distillery Director, and Dunville's master of maturation, let's call him. And Jarlath is going to taste this with me and you all on a private members Zoom on our Stories and Sips. So go to our website and register for that. Links are in your email. I'll send out another reminder on Wednesday to you all, but that's this Friday night, which will be great. I know many of you have opened your bottles, which I have no problem at all with you doing. You bought it to drink it, but it's a chance to drink it all together now and sample it and maybe ask questions after you've had a chance to put it in your glass and your belly. So that's coming up. We also drew our prize winners for the gift packs for those who purchased a bottle of our Dunvilles. We had 7 winners. We posted that on our Stories and Sips Facebook page. Go check that out. 6 different Ecklandville tasting kits and a bottle of the not the Port Morant, but rather their Palo Cortado finished 21-year-old single malt, voted Irish Whiskey of the Year last year. A bottle of that was won by one of our members as well. So all details are on our Facebook page, Stories and Sips. Congratulations to the winners. Also coming up in Stories and Sips this Wednesday, it's a busy week. This Wednesday, July 12th, I really encourage you to tune in at 7 o'clock Eastern this Wednesday night for a tour of Ireland's smallest distillery, Bwaylock. You know, many of you are probably looking at that pronunciation, wondering how are we going to pronounce that? Bwaylock, like B-W-A-Y, Bwaylock. And it is in Donegal on the north coast of Ireland. And Michael O'Boyle is the founder, distiller, bottle washer, painter, gardener, grower of the seeds. He's going to do it. He's going to lead us on a tasting, not a taste. He's going to lead us on a tour, which will take all of 5 minutes as he swivels on his chair with his camera. And then he's going to talk about all the things he's doing, which are really interesting with flavour. So we're really curious about the flavours he's creating in Donegal, in Ireland's smallest distillery. So really encourage you to tune in for that one. And we had a great Meet the Maker event with Tim O'Hurley from Lost Irish Whiskey last a few weeks ago. That is on our website, available, storiesandsips.com. The replay, if you missed it, you want to hear the origin story of Lost Irish and how Tim O'Hurley started that brand, go to our website and watch it. July is with Bwaylock, as you know, next Wednesday. And August, we're going to meet the Clancy family, the founders of Loughley Distillery. So interesting Meet the Maker events coming up. Upcoming tastings and releases, we've got, would you believe, we have another club whiskey bottle being announced in the next few weeks. Believe it or not, we are going to share details with you on July 21st, which is what? Not long away, 12 days away. I'm going to share some details and for availability in late July, early August. And I'm very excited about this next release. It is coming hot on the heels of our Dunville's, successful Dunville's launch. Rest assured, we are not looking for Dunville's money on this one. It's a lower priced product, but it is a fantastic whiskey, and I'm really excited to share the story of the distillery and the brand and the person behind it. So stay tuned for that. That's coming, as if you couldn't get enough whiskey. So if you're not a member of storiesandsips.com, our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club, I encourage you to join. We have great releases coming, great tasting events coming up. We have a blind tasting coming up we're working on at the moment as well. And we're going to get some whiskey kits out to you. Waterford Distillery tasting is on the cards for very soon as well. So we will definitely have four tastings this year, quarterly tasting events this year, and 4 next year. So if you want to join, please visit storiesandsips.com/club. We'd love to have you. Right. I think that's it for the Stories and Sips whiskey side of things.
Not really a lot going on, Barry, to be honest, is there? No.
I squeeze it all in between getting couples married and making sure that they're set on the right moral path. I squeeze in a few bottle releases on the way.
For good measure.
That's it. That's it indeed. So what's up next? So we have we thought we'd dive into something a bit different tonight.
We did, yeah. So barrels and coopers, 2 things which very much go hand in hand. And I think, I mean, as you said, Barry, we could be here for about 8 or 9 hours if we dived into the absolute ins and outs of the history of barrels and their use and everything like that. But it's, maturation and kind of the cooper element of whiskey making has always been my favorite. I don't know about you, but it's been the one thing that always really appealed to me. It is an art form. It's an absolute craft, just a complete skill. And I often compared the feeling of opening a warehouse to your food coming in a restaurant. Was how I described it. The smell, the sight, the sound, and just the history that comes behind a barrel is just unbelievable, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. It's this age-old part of whiskey making that hasn't, I won't say hasn't evolved, but hasn't needed to be improved upon in many ways. And there's just a beauty between the science and the art of barrel making and wood and that organic element of the production. I mean, so much of whiskey, of course, is of the earth, and the containers, the casks, the barrels being an integral part of that as well. And we take for granted now that we've got whiskey in a bottle. We often don't maybe think about the process that took it from that seed in the ground all the way through to the bottle. But that maturation piece is the piece that takes the longest for whiskey making, and would arguably be perhaps one of the most important, depending on who you talk to. If you talk to a cooper, they'll tell you it's the most important. If you talk to a distiller, they'll say, distilling's the most important. But it is the thing that takes the longest. And with Ireland now going through such a boom in whiskey production and demand for whiskey, it means there's more and more whiskey barrels in Ireland than ever before. And so we thought we'd dive into a little bit of their history, talk about how they're made, who are the people behind the barrel repairing and making side of things as well. Where do our barrels come from? And just have a bit of a chat, bit of a back and forth, and take any questions. I suppose we're not coopers ourselves, despite some videos we might share of our 4-minute apprenticeships. But we'll share some videos from those who make the barrels and who repair the barrels as well, because they can tell the story a lot better than us, can't they?
For sure. And I think you're right when you're saying about one of the, if not the most important element of whiskey making. I mean, it is where whiskey becomes whiskey. You know, you can't legally call it whiskey in Ireland unless it's rested in a barrel for 3 years. So technically it is the most important stage. And I think it's one of the elements of the whiskey production process that has remained relatively untouched by technology, which I think is amazing. So despite most distilleries now being able to operate with one person overlooking a computer, you just can't do that with a barrel. And I think it's really maintained an art form, which is incredible.
Lauren, you're going to take us back in time and to where it all began. You were there yourself back in the day.
I was there. Yes, my copious amounts of whiskey over the years have retained my youthful appearance, but I was actually there in 2600 BC, believe it or not. So yes, when I was doing a bit of research and a bit of more of a deep dive into the history of barrels and kind of how barrel making really came to be and how it came to be used in the whiskey industry. So the first sort of apparent reference of a barrel or a tub made of staves bound by hoops was 2600 BC. It was a painting of it in an Egyptian tomb, which I believe is pronounced Hezi Era. He was kind of an ancient Egyptian high official, and that was the first recorded reference, supposedly, of a barrel. And you can see here, I found this photo of an Egyptian tomb. And if you look up at the top, you can see some tools that resemble the tools that are still used today, like the hammer. You've got kind of, what do they call it? I think it's the arrowhead sort of Cooper's crows there as well, and things like that you can see at the very, very top. And I thought that was amazing that barrels were there in the times of Egyptians. And even another reference which I found unbelievable was Julius Caesar used barrels as a kind of an attack weapon. So he used to catapult barrels filled with burning tar into towns under siege. So they've had military uses. Barrels have been used to store ale, honey, fish, wine, everything over the years. I think any use you can think of a barrel, it has kind of been covered, really.
I've often heard coopers talk about the reasoning behind the barrel as a shape and as a container, in that it's actually a perfect container for many things. It's It's sturdy because of the way it's made, which we'll talk about in a bit. It's rollable, so you can actually transport it very easily. And if it's made the right way, it's relatively, almost completely leak-proof if you've got liquids inside it as well. And so it's, if you look through the years of all of the different storage containers for different industries, from beer to well, not even just spirits and alcohol, but the things we store food and oil and drinks in today have almost all evolved beyond the wooden barrel, except like whiskey and wine still retain that old use of how whiskey barrels and wine barrels were always made, and use them now to their advantage for flavor as well as just storage. It's kind of transitioned from storage and transportation to, there's actually something in this wood that can actually benefit our what's in the barrel.
Exactly, that's it. And in kind of ancient times as well, coopers used to be divided into two sort of sections, if you like, or two professions. So you had a wet cooper, which dealt with barrels that were used to store wet goods. Of course, the clues in the name, so the likes of wine, ale, and so on. And then you had dry coopers, which were used to store the likes of, what did I say earlier, fish, for example, and tea and whatever it may be that was stored in there. So it's unbelievable. They kind of had two purposes, not so much now, of course, but the wet coopers would have made barrels to a higher standard. They had to be completely kind of leak proof, as you just said, Barry. And maybe for some of the dry goods, it wasn't as important to have a barrel as of higher quality. So it's just unbelievable how it's kind of developed over the years.
That's very interesting. What other moments in history are important to casks and to whiskey barrels specifically?
So we had we talked earlier about the Guinness barrels, didn't we? Which,
that's right.
That's one of the things that I stood out about it was, and many people don't actually believe this. There's an image, I think if we move forward one, you'll actually see it on there. Guinness used to be stored, there we are, in wooden barrels. And many people don't actually realize this. I think this image was from about, when did I think? I think it was like 1936 I pulled this one from. And you can see they're clearly down at a shipyard there, being loaded onto a vessel of some description. You probably can't see it from the image that's on the screen, but they are branded with the Guinness on top of them. And I think now I haven't been in the Guinness storehouse in a while, but if you go in there, you can see there's an arch of wooden barrels, kind of representative of the past of Guinness being stored in there.
That's right.
So it would have had a very different flavor back then.
Oh, 100%. It was a different beer. These cask rested beers were a very different animal than we know today. So for 200 years, the Guinness brewery were making their beer and storing it in these wooden containers, these wooden casks, these wooden barrels, and the coopering industry would have been thriving in the 1800s, early 1900s in Ireland, with a massive army of coopers, and beers would have continued to evolve inside these wooden barrels. There would have been interactions between the yeast, between the wood, between the sugars that were inside the wood. There were additional chemical reactions of flavor happening, and it would have produced a very different beer. I was looking at notes from an interview that somebody did with somebody who remembered drinking the old barrel aged or barrel stored or cask conditioned Guinness of old, pre-1960s, and they talk about it being a creamier drink, with a bigger head almost on it in some cases. But these would not have been refrigerated. They wouldn't have been stored in cold rooms. This would have been Guinness that was room temperature. It was neither cold nor warm. It was just room temperature. And it was only in the 1960s when there was a big innovation around pasteurization and filtration, and then the move away from continuing the kind of process of the beer evolving in a barrel, moving to stainless steel, moving to kegs, which these stainless steel kegs, which are now the only thing that's really used apart from beer finished ales and cask ales that I know many purists want to see a return to. But for the most part, beer is stored, transported in these stainless steel kegs. And that was a massive evolution in terms of consistency, so that you could have the same flavour, the same tastes all around the world, which with a brand the size of Guinness and companies like that, you're looking for consistency rather than your beer tasting dramatically different in one place than it did in the other. But yeah, Guinness would have been a massive home of coopers and a huge producer of wooden barrels.
Absolutely. And I think what people sometimes don't realize as well is that bourbon barrels, for example, American bourbon casks, didn't really start to become used in Ireland properly until the kind of late 50s, 60s. Prior to that, it would have been, sherry casks that were taken from kind of the ports all around Ireland and used to store whiskey in them up until that point. So even though bourbon casks nowadays are used widely, largely across both the Irish and Scottish whiskey industries, they didn't really appear, as I said, until that time, the 1960s.
That's right, yeah. Today, and we'll talk about this in a bit, the bulk of the barrels used in Ireland are ex-bourbon / American whiskey barrels. So they're that 200 litre size of barrels that have come over intact, fully made from Kentucky, Tennessee, from brokerages, from Cooperage, from barrel brokerages in Kentucky and Tennessee, etc. They did start to make an appearance, like you said, in the 1960s. Prior to that, we were using whatever we could get our hands on in the Irish whiskey industry: sherry and port casks, rum casks, wine casks that, like you said, found their way into ports in Ireland, Dublin, Cork, Belfast, etc., Waterford. Whenever we were finished emptying those, yes, they were used for whiskey because they were the easiest thing to get our hands on. But there wasn't, talking to historians who've examined this in detail and traced the evolution of the whiskey barrel in Ireland, they talk about how even as recently as the 1970s, 1980s, still the inconsistency in Irish whiskey maturation in terms of barrels that were in warehouses, let's say in Bushmills or Middleton, or maybe even left over in Kilbeggan, like those would have been cobbled together with what was available, and there wasn't the maturation plan, the wood plan that there is today. The 1980s, 1990s changed all that. Middleton had a big move to revolutionize their cask management program and their approach to how they sourced barrels, where they sourced them from, different casks from different countries, Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, United States, and improved their cask program, because we'd start to learn more about what the barrel did and what the cask did to the whiskey inside it. But there was a time as well, like in the 60s and 70s, when barrels arrived into Ireland broken down. They were in little bundles called shucks. And Ger Buckley in Middleton, the Master Cooper, I remember him sharing the story about he'd see the pallets be unloaded from the trucks or off the boat, and there would be a ton of shucks, just little bound together packages of the 30 to 33 staves or thereabouts, and the heads, and then it was his job and the Cooper's job to put them all together. So they had kind of split their role, and they split their day between reassembling these and then repairing existing barrels in the distillery as well, which is fascinating.
It's interesting now as well where it has moved to essentially, Bushmills completely is repair only. Like when we go on to Chris and Alistair, they just, it's only purely a repair only. So repairing staves, repairing leaks and everything like that. So it was interesting, that kind of shift, as you say, from the quality from the 80s, 90s to now.
Tom has a good question, which, I don't have the answer to this, but I suspect that somebody else might. Were the barrels in Ireland charred 100 to 200 years ago? So today, all the barrels that are used are charred, but they come to Ireland already charred or toasted from the likes of Kentucky, Tennessee, from Spain, from Portugal, etc., where they've already had that process done. I suspect they were. Ger Buckley has shared examples of casks he's got that were never charred, never toasted, where whiskey spirit was just put into them, and he said it's the worst liquid you'll ever find in your life, and that charring and toasting process is absolutely necessary. So somebody else will have a better answer on that, but I do suspect there was there was charring done. I know historically as well, there was charring done to and lighting the inside of the barrels on fire to remove odors. There was sulfur added occasionally. Back in the day, you might have had a barrel that was used for something you didn't want that smell coming through the second time, so you put in a bit of sulfuric note. You don't typically come across that anymore. Maybe very, very old casks you might find it, but yeah, so it would have been a very inconsistent approach to barrel management and wood management back in the day.
I think one of the reasons, wasn't it, that they began to char barrels, as you said, Barry, was to remove the odour. It was mainly fish, wasn't it? Like barrels that were used to transport fish. You don't want that as a lingering smell in your cask if you're going on to use it for something else now, do you?
We know today the scientific benefits of charring a cask and the creation of a filtering layer and removing the impurities and kind of the poisons we don't want coming through from either the wood or kind of we want that spirit to be able to engage with the wood in the way that we want it to happen. And that wasn't always known historically. And so today we have roles like Master of Whiskey Science in Middleton Distillery, whose job is to understand the science behind whiskey and distillation and maturation and allow us to benefit from what we know today compared to historically. But interestingly, despite what we know today, we've still decided not to move away from this age-old process of maturing in wood because we know the benefits of it. And you hear numbers thrown around and they are argued and debated numbers depending on who you talk to about how much flavour comes from a barrel, 70% or 80%. That's an arguable and debatable topic, but we do know that, of course, there is flavour generated through the interaction. There's additive reactions, subtractive reactions, compound reactions happening inside that barrel. And the better the quality of the wood and the better the seasoning of that barrel and the better it's been maintained, obviously the better the whiskey that's going to come out of the other end as well.
For sure. And the image that's on the screen at the minute there, Barry, I think we had a laugh about this earlier, how formally dressed Coopers wear at one point. Like, they have shirts on. Nowadays it's usually an old t-shirt and a pair of trousers with holes in them. That's the
I know.
The
it was and I think that to the best of my knowledge, that's either Bow Street in Dublin or Middleton in Cork.
You're right, it's Bow Street, yeah.
It's Bow Street, yeah. I mean, if you look closely at that image, you'll see some young kids in there that embarked on you wouldn't have almost called it a career, but it was kind of a lifelong job that hopefully you were able to get because your father had it, your grandfather had it, your uncle had it, and a job in somewhere like a distillery would have been considered a job for life, and maybe a chance of you having the funds and time to buy a house and raise a family. But you were getting into a gig that was dangerous, in dangerous environments. You were small and young, and you didn't have the strength to be managing these big barrels and tools, but yet you were put right there to learn from those who'd been doing it for their whole lives. And there is a document, you'll see it in the Middleton Distillery if you ever visit the Cooperage, that shows the list of requirements of a child or an apprentice that becomes a cooper, and it's basically all the criteria of indentured servitude. Like, you are now a slave to the process and a slave for your life. I mean, things like you couldn't date, you couldn't visit with a woman outside of outside of work. You wouldn't have met anybody in work. You couldn't drink. There were things that you were really restricted in what you could do. But you signed up for it because it was the only hope of getting paid when there was so much of Dublin or so much of Cork impoverished. This was just a great opportunity despite the challenges with the role.
That's it. And you said about kind of the risks and the safety precautions. It's very unusual that a cooper makes his entire way through his career with all of his fingers intact. I
know.
Jared does, and Chris and Alistair do, so they're fine, which is unbelievable. But it used to be a very rare thing that a cooper made his whole way through with all his limbs, let's just say.
It's interesting, the time there. So that's 1936, this photograph. So 1938 was another big moment in the history of wood and casks and what has led us to the flavors we have today. So what these gentlemen wouldn't have known at the time was Franklin Roosevelt, far off in the distant land of the United States, was crafting the New Deal to get the United States out of Depression to create rules and policies and protections for workers, for industry in the United States. And 1938 was a big year because of the rules that were put in place around wood and the bourbon industry. So today we use predominantly ex-American whiskey barrels, ex-bourbon, ex-Kentucky or Tennessee whiskey barrels because of a rule that was enacted in 1938. So in 1938, as these rules were being written, the bourbon industry was going through a lot of change. It had come out of, it was coming out of like this Great Depression. This is pre-war time. We also had this, the Prohibition era, where all kinds of illicit alcohols and poisons were finding their way into bottles. And it was time to stabilize and put in place standards for what could and couldn't be called a whiskey or a bourbon. And at the time the bourbon rules are being written, obviously you've got so many different vested interests in the production of whiskey, and it was actually the Coopers and the lumber industry back in the day in the 1930s started to lobby for their voice to be heard, because they wanted to make sure that going forward they had jobs and that their roles be protected, because it was as it is today, with the stroke of a pen, an entire category of workers can be eliminated because they're no longer protected, or there can be a whole new category of workers created because of the addition of a line into legislation. And so they lobbied hard for their interests to be protected. And so their lobbying resulted in a line being added to the standards for what bourbon could and couldn't be. And the rule is very simple. The line is very simple. In order for the whiskey to be called bourbon, one of the rules was that it must be matured in a charred new oak, white oak or American oak container. And what that ensured was that every time you wanted to put a spirit into a barrel that was going to be called bourbon eventually, you needed a new barrel. You couldn't use one that you'd used previously. And so that protected the role of the Coopers. It protected the lumber industry, who could keep growing and felling their trees and supplying them to the Coopers and the distilleries. And as the bourbon industry and the American whiskey industry grew, it created this kind of a barrel mountain where there were hundreds of thousands of barrels that could no longer be used for the production of bourbon, and there's only so many you can turn into keychains and garden furniture and little souvenirs. And so in the 1960s, late 1950s, early 1960s, the Scots, the Irish, we started to recognize the value of these oak barrels. And they had been used once in the American system for whether it was a few months or a few years, and we started shipping them over to Ireland. But that one line that changed the rules or enshrined that rule in place ensured the availability of affordable, good quality containers to us in Ireland. What's now 80 to 90 years later, where our Irish whiskey has a profile and a flavour profile that is derived from American oak predominantly, because of a rule enacted in 1938, which is fascinating.
And I think, just to follow on from your point there, Barry, one of a great example of that is the Kelvin Cooperage, which is now in Louisville in Kentucky. So the Kelvin Cooperage was started by two brothers, Kevin and Paul McMullan, in 1963 on the banks of the River Kelvin in Glasgow. So they would have obviously, the barrels would have been coming over from the US at this time, and they saw an opening they thought to themselves, well, why don't we go and start a business over there and have the casks in a great condition, repair them at the source before they make their way over to the Irish and Scottish industry. So I think it was 1991 they moved to Louisville in Kentucky and set up ship there. So kind of to improve the quality of the barrels coming over for the Irish and Scottish whiskey industries. I did an event with Paul McLaughlin a few years back when we launched the American Oak Bushmills cask, because Bushmills is actually twinned with Louisville in Kentucky. Really random piece of information. So we did an event with him, and it was really interesting how he said that they saw that opening in the market to go over there and start kind of their own cooperage and have the barrels to a standard that they wanted, which is interesting.
It's a remarkable element of the whiskey making process in how it demonstrates this kind of amazing circular economy within whiskey. The fact that it takes the longest period, the longest part of whiskey making is its maturation, anywhere from 3 years to currently about 46, 47 years, 48 years, we see whiskey being matured for in Ireland. That's after the oak tree has grown from 80 to 100 years worth of growing. It's after the tree being cut down, after it being halved and then quarter sawn, after the 6 months to 2-3 years of the barrels drying out in the air drying, or in some cases kiln drying, and then the toasting, the charring of the barrels, or in the case of, let's say, on the Spanish side of things, so the next most used casks in the world of Irish whiskey, I would argue, are Spanish casks, ex-sherry casks, where they have been seasoned with sherry for maybe 2 years or so. And so that adds to the time as well. And so you're long before you even put the spirit in Ireland, 100+ years of steps have taken place. Now we age it for another 40 years, let's say, in Ireland, and the lifespan of the barrel still hasn't been utilised fully, because if it's made from Spanish oak or American oak, it tends to have quite a good lifespan. And especially the American oak barrels, they don't finish their life in Ireland, do they?
No, that's it. I mean, they can, and very often they're recharred and they can go on to the likes of Scotland or whatever it may be. So it's unbelievable when you kind of look at a barrel, or you hold a piece of wood, you hold a stave, it can be like 140, 150 years old, which is unbelievable. As you say, you only see it for that moment in the distillery, but you kind of forget the process that it took to get it there.
And many of the barrels that are finished, that have gone through their second or third fill in Ireland. So in Ireland, we typically refer to barrels in terms of how many times they were filled after they previously contained something else. So a barrel or a cask, and when I say the words barrel or cask, so a cask is all sizes of wooden containers. A barrel is actually a unit of measurement, 200 or 225 litres in size, really typically 200 litres. In the American system, it's 200 litres, so that's a barrel. But they continue their lives long after the second fill or third fill. Like Lauren said, they might be recharred, they might go off to Scotland, and also they might find their way back across the Atlantic, but not to mainland USA. Instead, they might go to the Caribbean, they might go to Puerto Rico, they might go to somewhere like Cuba. It depends on agreements that are in place and the brands that own them. But they'll end up in rum distilleries where they'll spend another 30 or 40 years storing rum. So what's the lovely thing about that is that the perfectly made barrel, of all the barrels you get, the one that's perfect will actually have a lifespan equal to about the same time it takes to regrow the tree. So it'll be about 80 years. And by the time you're finished using it, a new tree has grown. So it's this wonderful renewable resource that is good for everyone along the way if it's done right. And I think that's the most, it adds to the romance and the mystique of Irish whiskey again, that you've got this wonderful renewable element to it as well.
The barrels can, and I always used to say to people, there really is no end for what you can use a barrel for, as in when the whiskey industry is finished with them, they can go into garden furniture. There was at one point in time, our guitars were being turned into, or our barrels were being turned into guitars. I think Ed Sheeran has one, which is quite interesting. Elijah Wood has headphones made out of a barrel, and a trend more recently, I think in the last maybe 3 years, they've actually gone to Mexico, where tequila is aged in ex-whiskey barrels as well. So
that's right, really tequila, Trinidad, they go for Tabasco production. It's funny, when I performed that wedding yesterday, the gift I got from the bride and groom was actually a watch made of whiskey staves, recycled whiskey staves, believe it or not.
No way. Well, that's amazing, yeah.
So there's lots of uses for whiskey barrels. A good question there from Fat Daddy on YouTube. How much does a once-used bourbon barrel cost? So I've seen $75, $120, that kind of range but it depends on the grade. They're graded at the cooperage or at the brokerage. So the brokerage, typically you're not buying them anymore from the distilleries directly. The distillery will sell them in the United States to a brokerage who will then grade all the barrels, and then based on the grade, I think it's like A1, A2 or something, I can't remember exactly how they grade them, the pricing will vary.
I've seen exactly the same. Even an interesting trend that I noticed from kind of transport or logistics companies that would transport barrels to be exported to X, Y, and Z locations. They can sometimes buy use barrels from distilleries and sell them. So I've seen ones, like you said, Barry, there for about maybe $50 to $75. Now they've maybe been used 3 or 4 times, but if you're lucky, you'll still get maybe a tiny little bit of a whiskey at the bottom of the barrels. It might put a bit of water in it and make, what is it they call it in Australia, swish? I think it's swish.
Is that what it is?
I think so, yeah.
Lots of great comments there about different uses that people have for the barrels. And Chris says he keeps getting ads on Facebook for rings made from whiskey barrels. Steve uses whiskey barrel chunks in his smoker in the past, which I've seen those advertised as well. Mark says there's a possible shortage of white oak for all the new barrels needed. Yeah, there are discussions at the moment as to whether those rules for white oak will or the rules for oak usage in bourbon will continue based on availability. Most of the oak used in the United States comes from typically like Missouri, the Ozarks, kind of the east and kind of Midwest / eastern seaboard of the United States is where most of the oak comes from. But there is such as the growth in the whiskey industry globally that the demand for these barrels is going through the roof. So the typical humans, we have to absolutely destroy available resources.
That's it.
and it's never enough for us.
No, it's always the sustainability questions that kind of rear their head, as you say, Barry, with the growth of a certain industry, like the questions even of barley supply as well, with the amount of Irish distilleries that are coming up and how sustainable it is to continue to distilleries to use barley from Ireland. It was the same thing a few years back with even the agave plants, which are obviously used to produce tequila. There was a shortage of them because they take 8 to 10 years to harvest. So it's all these questions come into play, and it sometimes does lead to rules and regulations being amended to fit the current times.
I know. It's it'll be interesting to see over the next few years where that all goes and where all the demand focuses attention on what elements of the supply chain, and it's beyond even the whiskey, beyond even the barrels, where you start to see challenges. Like in the world of Irish whiskey now, the projected sales figures or the projected demand between now and 2030 tell us a few things. One is how much distilling capacity we need, which we don't actually have yet. So we actually don't have the distilling capacity for the whiskey that we'll actually need yet. It doesn't mean we can't scale up to get there. But the other things we don't have is we actually don't have warehouse space and bottling lines capable of managing the demand that's projected. So Ireland is trying to figure out how to scale up. And one of the challenges of warehouse space is that you can't just drop a warehouse anywhere. It has to go through an awful lot of planning, very strict planning regulations. And every area in Ireland will have its own planning, its own plan for that area, its own 10-year plan, residential plan, commercial plan for what that land should be used for. And warehouses can't just be dropped into the middle of a neighborhood. They can't just go into any old field because there's plans for the area. So we're seeing distilleries getting warehouse space turned down and planning permission turned down. There was a case maybe a year or two ago where John Teeling had bought a lot of land in County Louth to put up warehouses for the growing Great Northern Distillery, only to have all of the planning permission turned down, and I was got to find a way to get rid of the land. Same happened with the Hascraw Distillery in East Galway. They were turned down for planning permission. So West Cork distillers are going through it, that as well at the same time. So it's going to be interesting to see how do we balance this economic need for the warehouses with the realities of not in my backyard kind of approach. People are afraid of flame, afraid of fire, afraid of the little fungus, the black fungus sticking to their house, afraid of all the trucks rolling up and down to the distillery, up and down to the warehouses. So lots to consider. That's
it. Chris just raised a very good point there. People need to stop wasting white oak on things like furniture. So the solution to that is we just don't have wooden furniture in our houses anymore. No wooden floors, just carpet.
We'll make the sacrifice.
Done.
We'll make that sacrifice. Lauren, do you want to take us through, maybe introduce us to some of the people in the world of coopering? So we've seen in the last few years, thankfully, with the rise in demand for Irish whiskey, we're now seeing the rise in demand for those individuals who are responsible for repairing and advising and taking care of all the barrels that are in storage in Ireland, the coopers themselves. So there is, I think for the first, there've never been more coopers in Ireland in the past 50 years than there are now, which is a good thing.
That's right, yeah. So when you look back, there used to be at one point 6,000 coopers in Ireland. and now there are less than 10, which, when you really take a moment to register, that is quite shocking. And a few of the people that we'll mention tonight, the likes of Chris and Alistair Keane, of course, at Bushmills, and Ger Buckley at Middleton, that they have witnessed the decline in the kind of the art of the cooper, which is such a shame. So Alistair Keane, who is the kind of one of the master coopers at Bushmills, when he started in the distillery, there were 12 coopers in Bushmills, and they've rapidly declined from 12 right down to just him. So at one point he was kind of panicking, thinking, okay, I really want my son Chris to get into this art with me, to kind of help the name survive and help the art survive as well, and thankfully he did. So one thing that's incredible about Chris and Alistair, they're third and fourth generation coopers. So Chris, the son, his great grandfather, he started working in Bushmills in 1935, and he is still using tools, hammers that his great grandfather would have used. So if you look at some of their tools, they actually have kind of fingerprints and thumb indentations in them, and they just refuse to use modern tools and modern kind of innovations, because their logic is, if it's not broken, don't fix it, which I couldn't agree with more. They're kind of honoring the trade that their grandfathers and their family had before them. So an incredible legacy that they both hold in the distillery. So Chris, he's on the right hand side there on the photo on the screen. The son, he in 2018 he graduated from the National Cooperage Federation over in Scotland. So that's something interesting as well. You still really certainly in 2018 had to go to Scotland to complete his apprenticeship to become a cooper, and he was the first person in Ireland in 30 years to become a fully qualified cooper, which is unbelievable. So I think it used to be in the 1880s, it used to be a 7-year apprenticeship. Now I believe it's 4, but he completed it a year early, which is kind of testament to the sort of skills that had been passed on to him from Alistair, and even that he learned from his grandfather before him. So these guys are responsible for almost 500,000 barrels. And as I said earlier, it's a repair-only cooperage, so they're never allowed time off together. No, I'm only joking.
That's the only father and son team in Ireland, isn't it? That would be the only father and son actively working. I know it's been handed down through generations in other areas. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, only father and son duo. Absolutely. They are indeed.
We have a little video from a visit to Bushmills not so long ago. I visited with Lauren and with Alex Thomas, Master Blender, back in January last year. And Alex brought us in to meet Alistair, who gave us a little bit of a demonstration on the repairing of a barrel and on the, really interestingly, the adding of the head to the barrel and the tightening of that barrel to ensure there's no leakage and what they do with it. So we've got a little 5-minute video that we're going to play for you of that visit. If you haven't already seen it, I think you'll enjoy it. We're witnessing legends here explaining to us things that they've done for half a century, and we're in their awe at what they can do with their hands. So let's watch a little video here from Alistair in Bushmills.
Bushmills Cooperage. And this is Alistair Keane, the legendary cooper of Bushmills.
How are you?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
How are you?
How are you?
I'll stand back from you.
This is amazing. So how long have you been here in the distillery?
I started on here on some date in February 1976.
Wow. Could you not find the door out? No?
No, that's no? I've never I'm here ever since.
His grandfather was here before him.
Is that right?
There's actually there's somebody's up a picture there on now, the old one, and there's a Frank Keane on it. Them's all, I only know as far back as my grandfather, but there was ones on it beyond that, like on both sides of the thing too, so I don't know how far it goes.
Wow. Well, are you busy here?
Oh, what they do, like.
Yeah?
So it is, that's, we left out, that was one there that came in yesterday and needed a new end on it. And then this one here was dropped, and there's 7, you can see he's to put 7 tapes in here. That's that one there.
Yeah.
So that gives you a wee bit, but it's a case of whenever it's like that there, you have your broken staves all something. So then you get one just to match it.
Yep.
And then you rejoint them all and then build them all and then fill that gap back in.
Right.
And I'm back into the original cruise there. That's it, ready to be rushed now. These here, to keep them in there in the dark, because if you feel them there, you can feel them slightly bit of pliable on them. If they're left in the too dry or too bright, as they dry out, you could actually do that and crumble them into nothing, you know. So you always try and keep them in somewhere dark and get them, you know, and just a slightly dampish air on it. The dampness on there is perfect for you, you know. So whenever you're doing this, you can see the way here, there are parts of the end is sitting away from the crews here. And then there's some of them are tight. This here, you put the rush on, no bother, whenever it's like that. But whenever you come to these ones here, if you try and put on this here, it'll chop it all up in pieces. And so that was the first thing I ever done, never come in through the door, I had to make that. So that's been
original.
Ever since. It's just a piece of one of the hoops. And that's it's used for different things, you know. But if you put a slight twist on it, and then just pack it in, and if you come in it, but you can just keep slightly twisting it, and it'll just pack on the whole way right round, you know. You just keep right round the whole thing, and you seal it right up like that, and then if you'd put any new staves on, then the joint, see the way that joint there and that joint's sitting slightly more wider than these ones. So if you wanted to do that, get a slightly heavier rush. And then, again, this is one of the usages for this thing here. You actually just flatten it out.
And that's watertight, the rush is...
Once that gets, the whiskey touches that, it just slightly expands. And then it seals the whole thing up. So you can feel the inside over there.
Spongy.
Spongy, reedy type of material. If there's a big gap in it, you'd use it the way it is. Another use for it is some of the times part of the cruise or the chain here could break away and leave you with a fairly, like a big gap you could nearly get your finger on. The way you do with that now is you get the rush and bring it up. You just keep to you do like that till you get the actual size. You could actually put a piece on that size and seal it up once it goes in. So once you put that all on like that, then you just get it like that, and then you would pull the stave out, slide that in, and then trim it off and let the thing on. But most of the time you do it like this here, and it would be just the actual skim of the actual rush you need for it. My father, in my grandfather's time, the distillery stopped production in the months of July and August every year. So they had local lakes and beside the river and stuff, they went and cut all these things. Then brought them in and dried them out for the start of the following year. But they're from Holland. They're all brought in through Holland. But as I say, it's still
dropped off there at the end of it.
It was nearly over anyway, it's alright.
I'll put up the last minute of it, just cut out there. Let me find it again.
It's still the best way. If you're working with a wax and they're rolling the bar and the bar hits something and the end will shift, well, that breaks the wax side. Whereas with this here, you just get the hammer up and you bang it, push it back into place,
Okay.
and that still seals the whole thing up.
And that's obviously easier than making a new head all the time. Yeah.
It saves you could actually, if I got a hard enough knob, let's say that piece there could actually be shifted nearly an inch, and the whiskey could be run there.
Yeah.
For one.
Amazing, isn't it?
It's just unbelievable the passion at which they speak about, even though they've probably spoke about the same thing hundreds of times, and it's still the same level of enthusiasm.
It's great to hear Alistair. Every time I've heard him, he's just he speaks with a knowledge that is so taken for granted by him because he spent 50 years working it, learning it, and it's just so natural to him. But it always keeps everybody else in awe when they see a demonstration. Laurie there in the comments talking about how by his count there's maybe at least 11 qualified coopers in Ireland, and with some Kelvin Cooperage lads it might be up as far as the mid-teens, which is amazing to see, and great to know that there's this potential pathway for woodworkers and those with interest in crafting wood and continuing this age-old tradition, that there is a pathway now for them in the Irish whiskey industry. A couple of more people that are working in the industry. Let's put up a slide or two here. If we move along, maybe we'll touch briefly on this one, Lauren.
Yeah, so these are apprentice coopers at Tullamore Dew. So they are, now this photo was taken.
Two lads on the left. Yeah.
Two lads on the left, Corey and Dylan. They are 20 and 21. When they started, they were 18 and 19. So I think it's unbelievable that like lads of that age really want to get into an ancient craft, which is unbelievable. And one of the things that really stood out to me, what they said, was that they're home birds, and they don't want to see the craft of barrel making and the kind of the cooperage art moving elsewhere in the world. They don't want to go to Scotland. They don't want to go to the US. They want to see it thrive in Ireland. So it's great that we have got two apprentice coopers on board here under the watchful eye of the guy on the right hand side, who is Ongerhond Vondenbosch, I think, if I do not butcher the pronunciation name. So yeah, under the watchful eye. Now he's moved on now, Barry, you were saying earlier, hasn't he?
Yeah, Ongerhond is now with Darnua Cooperage, which is interesting now that we've got cooperages now popping up in Ireland that are independent of the distilleries. So there was a point where it was Bushmills had a cooperage, Middleton had a cooperage, and then there were journeyman coopers who were working the likes of, I think, Cooley and Kilbeggan, and moving between them. John Neely was it back in the day. There was a few others as well. And now we've got independent cooperages that are serving the needs where some distilleries won't have the need for a full-time cooper, but they will have the need for somebody to come in and help them with repairs without sending things off site. So there will be the likes of these journeymen who will travel to distilleries, but then if you want things done off site, you've got the likes of Darnua Cooperage, which we'll look at in a second as well. I think I've got a picture up here somewhere in Foxford in County Mayo as well, which is great to see. Ger Buckley, of course, is a legend in the world of Irish whiskey. He's the master cooper at Middleton. Ger is a fifth generation cooper, isn't it? Fifth, sixth, seventh, like I lose track. Fifth generation, that's right. And Ger is he's a woodworker and a furniture maker himself, outside of working and repairing and being responsible for the 1.8 million barrels in the Middleton distillery. And Ger is a fantastic presenter and educator and storyteller and sharer of his craft. Ger now has an apprentice under him, Killian, who's from Cork, who is just finished up recently his own kind of apprenticeship in terms of spending 2 years in Scotland and Kentucky to learn the craft before coming back to Middleton. And Ger is only too keen to share his skills. I spent a little bit of time learning over a few minutes the craft of barrel shaving, stave shaving with Ger not long ago. But we've got a little video here from Ger, two little videos, one half a minute and one a minute long. Let me put these up here. Pure skill.
So you're in full control how much wood you want to remove.
I see.
By turning the handle down low.
Right.
There you go. There you go. You get nice rolls off that now.
You think?
You give him a start
Is there
here.
a job for me?
Give him a start, all right, yeah?
But he'd probably need about an 8-year apprenticeship.
I have to do that indentured servitude, though, don't I?
You do. You have to sign away all sorts of things. Is anybody?
And here's, as you can tell, I'm very skilled at this role. But here's a little bit more of Ger sharing his old tools. These are tools that are handed down from generation to generation, which is amazing, and they're still being used today.
You can see I'm peeling it. I'm not chopping at the wood. I'm in control of the wood. So by kind of and I'm starting to get the shape into it. Now I'll look at it and I'll decide maybe I have another bit to go. Maybe I should take a bit more off here or whatever, right? So I can go back over it again and just. And then when you're done, I've somewhat of the angle created on the wood. When you run your hand along it, there's no kind of tool marks. It's almost.
On a totally unrelated note, Barry, you've gone from a thick Bushmills accent on the north coast and a good old Cork accent in the south. One extreme to the other.
Both very comforting accents to hear. You're in safe hands. You're in safe hands. Laurie adding in there, Ger Buckley has a current apprentice. Cooper is Derek Cronin, which is good. So Killian must be the graduated and is a Cooper, and then the apprentice then is Derek, I believe. And let us know if we've got that right. The let's move quickly through some of these other bits and pieces. Let me see here. Oh yeah, so I wanted to share here. This is one of the warehouses in Midleton Distillery. So when you talk about where all these barrels are being stored, how they're being stored, and then that you've got these Coopers on site now whose job it is to kind of monitor and repair and make changes. What you've got here is a photograph from inside warehouse number 29A in the Midleton Distillery. It's one of 79 warehouses that are currently on site at the distillery. There's 58 additional warehouses 15 minutes away in the small village of Dungorney, just outside Midleton. And this will be the largest stock overall of whiskey maturing in wooden barrels in Ireland currently. So close to 2 million barrels at the moment. There are, in each of these warehouses, to give you some sense of the size, there are 16,800 barrels in each warehouse. There are 20 bays. Each bay has 840 barrels each. 7 pallets high, 6 barrels per pallet. The barrels are never turned, never rolled, and they're aged there from 3 years to 40 plus years. And like I said, 79 warehouses on site at Midleton and 58 nearby. And with the current rate of demand for storage space, luckily Midleton now has the capacity to grow in Dungorney. They have additional space. There's a new warehouse being built every 2 months. So every 2 months, they need space for another 16,800 barrels. And they're keeping up with that demand at the moment. 60 plus new warehouses currently in planning for Midleton Distillery, which is an extraordinary setup. One of the largest whiskey warehouse complexes in the world, believe it or not. And so that's where these American oak barrels, the Spanish oak casks are finding their way to and spending their good Irish journey of 3 to 40 plus years sleeping and giving us the whiskey that we want. Tony asks a question, is there a reason that barrels are stored upright in Ireland rather than on their sides? I posed that question to Kevin O'Gorman, the master distiller. He said they've done the analysis on it from a flavour profile. Some people argue that by putting it on its side, it allows more contact with the head of a barrel where there's more kind of surface area for the whiskey to be, the spirit to be touching. But he said that the flavour results are so indiscernible from one another that it makes no difference to them. They store them upright from a safety and a storage perspective today. Ease of movement, forklifts can easily move them around. There's no reason for anybody to be having to roll barrels anymore in the distillery. So it's predominantly safety and efficiency of storage today. And there's no rotation of the barrels at all happens. Naturally over time, the liquid is moving invisible to the naked eye in and out of the wood, and there's no need for us to be shaking it around and making it happen. The barrels will eventually be tipped on their side to be emptied as they're filtered and then vatted together with the rest of the spirit. All right, let us move along. Lauren, we want to talk a little bit about the day in your life, because right now, and we could talk for hours about coopering. We could talk for hours about wood. We just wanted to touch on it tonight, and we'll, in the interest of time, we'll move on from that right now. But great to see the interest on the wood side of things and the growth of coopering. We're now into, Lauren is not a cooper. You might be forgiven for assuming that we're going to have a day in the life of Lauren the Cooper. But Lauren, you're in a different role now than your former role at Bush Mills, and we want to know a little bit about what you're doing.
Absolutely. Speaking of days in the life, Richard, no, don't worry. The forklift gig was one day only. I did not qualify to be a permanent forklift driver, so you're very much safe in that regard. Yeah, so day in the life, what my day looks like now, the guy in the photo you can see there, is a brand which I hope as we build out our experiences that we start to see a little bit more of mentioned in various groups, Irish Whiskey Fans of America and the club and so on and so forth. That's Tim. Tim is brand development / brand ambassador for the Copeland Distillery in County Down in the very, very small seaside coastal village of Donaghadee. So I met with Tim on Wednesday for a catch up, for a chat to see what potential experiences we could build out around Copeland. And let me tell you, there's an experience there, all right. I couldn't wait to talk to Barry about it when I got home. Really interesting brand. They don't currently have their own liquid yet, but it is happening in the next probably year and a half, I believe. Really exciting things coming out of there. Really cool brand. And as they said, one I hope we see more of. So day in the life, what I've always loved about the Irish whiskey industry, previous role and current role, as cliche as this sounds, there are no 2 days that are exactly the same, and that keeps it fresh, it keeps it exciting. It really depends on the deadlines that you're working to and the goals that you're working to. And at the minute, as myself and Barry have kind of touched upon there, is the launch of our inaugural experiences and our website launch of Irish Whiskey Experiences on the 30th of July. So that's ultimately the goal that we're working towards at the minute. So what that looks like engaging with brands, engaging with distilleries that may be, as I said, with Tim and Copeland, potential upcoming experiences that we can launch on our website that are exclusive to us. It can be planning Whiskey Bus 3, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. It could be pricing hotels. It could be looking at transport, a world of things. And it's just so exciting and I said this last week, it's just so exciting to work in something that is completely new and build it out really from the ground up and be a part of that. It's unbelievable. And there's so many learnings. It's so exciting. You think about things that you never would have imagined that you would have to consider before. And yeah, it's all systems go at the minute, but it's great.
It's very much an unknown quantity when we started into it, because we had an idea of what we wanted to do, but that the delta between the idea and the execution, of course, can be wide. And that wide delta is where we're figuring out, we need to go deeper on this thing. We need to spend more time over here. Website development, a huge part of what we're doing at the moment is making sure that on July 30th, when we go live, that there is the ability for us to be able to not just share with you everything we're planning for our launch experiences, but ways for you to get your questions answered, ways for you to book experiences, ways for us to take your hard-earned money for these experiences, ways for us to ensure that you get issued whether it's tickets to an experience or understand what the next steps are. So putting ourselves going through the user journey, going through the journey you'll go through, so that we understand what has to be in place, is where we're spending a lot of our time at the moment, isn't it?
That's it. And it's kind of putting yourself in your shoes, in the shoes of a guest, and thinking, what is the absolute best that we can offer from our perspective to make that experience one that you genuinely won't forget. And it's, anybody can walk into a distillery, you can walk into Rowan Co, you can walk into Middleton, you can walk into Bushmills and so on and have a tour. That's fine. But it's about going beyond that and kind of peeling further behind what's in your glass and offering you the stories, the places, and just more of a kind of a deep dive into the brands that we're working with. So yeah, it's about going above and beyond the usual.
I wanted to I want to use the Shebeen as a bit of a vehicle for us to share that journey too, not just, hey, here's new experiences, but you, me and Anthony talked last week about the idea of sharing what's working well and where there's challenges and things we're coming up against. And I think the Shebeen is a great way for us to share with you what is, how it's going, you know, and build it out that way. I think we did the same with the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club. I think we should do the same here with the whiskey experiences. But I think the one challenge I've recognized, you might have a different one, is the opportunities are great. The time availability to us is not, in the sense of there's only so much we can do at any one time. And we have a long list of all the coming soon experiences that we'll start to roll out and work on once we go live. But that's been a bit of I wouldn't call it a disappointment, but I wish we had the ability to have everything now, and cautioning ourselves to not overdo it prior to launch.
I agree. And I think as well, you'll agree with me, Barry, it's more kind of, this is pretty much building on your point, is how many times can we realistically do an experience within a year? You know, some of the experiences we're working on, it's like, okay, where can we find that balance between giving all of you and our kind of wider audience and guests and potential guests, like, I suppose, that experience, those unbelievable experiences, but also respecting the fact that the people that we're working with are very busy. That's the bottom line of it. And it's kind of respecting their time as well as trying to offer great experiences. So as you said, the list of ideas is unbelievable, but it's the little pieces between, the moving parts in between.
I know. And everybody wants to spend time with the distillers and the blenders and the masters, all of whom, as you said, are people whose job is not to be a tourism ambassador or a tour guide. It is to make whiskey, mature whiskey, give us the product. And so we're going to try and balance that so that we're not overrunning a distillery with experiences. We're finding a balance where we can have the best experiences to showcase the distillery or the brand without abusing the privilege of being able to get close to that distillery too. Let's talk very quickly about Whiskey Bus number 3 then. So we said we'd reveal one of our experiences that's coming up, and I think we should do that now. We have our Whiskey Bus number 2 launching kicking off in 40 plus days out of Dublin, heading down to Cork, the road to Cork. We're very excited about it. Lots of finishing touches being put to that program. But we are also working on Whiskey Bus 3, which will leave, well, we won't tell you all the details, but it is in March, and we are sharing the details on July 30th. But we wanted to share one of the finished, ready-to-present experiences that will be part of Whiskey Bus 3. And next week on the Shebeen, we'll share more experiences that are coming. So by the time we get to July 30th, you'll already have a sense of some of the things we're launching. Isn't that fair?
I think that's fair. We don't want to reveal all just yet. We want to keep a little bit of that element of surprise, as you said, Barry, until the 30th. But I think you have to reveal this one. It's your own.
Okay, we'll share this one. So we're very excited that one of the first experiences that will happen on Whiskey Bus number 3, not long after you'll get off the plane, is drum
roll.
We have got a Napo Castle experience for our Whiskey Bus guests. We will take over the castle. We're going to taste in the hallowed floors and grounds and rooms of the Napo Castle in County Clare. We are going to be treated to a tasting of Napo Castle whiskies by blender Dave McCabe from Middleton Distillery, who's going to come to the castle and walk us through the portfolio of Napo Castle whiskies in the very home that the brand was born all the way back in the 1960s and 1966. And 1967. And in addition to tasting the current portfolio, you will have a chance to taste Napo Castle 1951 in Napo Castle, the famed pot still whiskey. Some of you had a chance to try it on one of our recent tastings. Very rare bottling. Irish distillers have kindly given us a couple of bottles to be able to taste on the night. So one of your experiences when you get to Ireland Whiskey Bus number 3 in March is the Napo Castle experience. This is a big one, and I'm really excited for what we can do in the castle, and whether we have some food, some music, some whiskey, we're definitely going to have the crack.
We are indeed, Tony. I knew there had to be someone ask a question if we're buying the castle. No. We're only tasting in it. We're not buying it.
That's all. Lauren, your sound has gone a bit robotic there. You might have to kill a few programs on your computer just to make sure. So it's that's what's happening in Whiskey Bus number 3. We'll share more details of that coming up on our next Shebeen, and additional experiences that we're launching as well. So all that we'll say to you right now is go to our website, irishwhiskeyexperiences.com. We've put a link inside the comments there. I'll drop it in again so that when we launch on July 30th, you'll get access to all of the elements of our experiences. Some of you have had questions about what the launch of the next Whiskey Bus is going to look like. So Whiskey Bus number 2, which takes place in August, we gave access to our Whiskey Bus 1 attendees to have first right of refusal on that Whiskey Bus. We're not going to do that again, only because we can't give the same people the chance every time to get access to the Whiskey Bus, or there'll be no space for anybody else. So we're basically going to offer it on a first come, first served basis. We won't be opening up sales of places on the night of July 30th, which is a Sunday night. That's the night of a Shebeen. We will do a Shebeen together. Anthony, Lauren and I will co-host another Shebeen on July 30th to share all the experiences, including Whiskey Bus 3. And then the next day, August 1st, in the afternoon, we'll share the timing. We will open up ticket sales for Whiskey Bus number 3, where you can just, the first people to pay a deposit will get their seat reserved. There'll be 36 to 38 seats, I believe, on that Whiskey Bus number 3 available. And it'll just be on a first come, first served basis. So we'll do as much as we can to share with you all the details the night before and leading up to it between now and then. And then for those of you who'd like to join us in March, what are the dates in March, Lauren?
They are the 15th to the 22nd. Is my sound okay now?
Not great. No.
Is it not?
We're going to get you. We're going to have to upgrade your memory on your computer.
We are. Apologies.
That's all right. I'll put you on mute there for a second. But we're on the last slide or two anyway today. But the Whiskey Bus 3 is an exciting West Coast adventure. March 15th to the 22nd are the dates for our Whiskey Bus number 3, and those dates will allow you to be dropped off if you want at Cork Whiskey Fest, down to Laurie and Whiskey Chats podcast, who host the Cork Whiskey Fest year 2 coming up. So if you wanted to tie on a visit to Cork Whiskey Fest, we'll figure out a way for you to do that and work with Laurie on getting access to tickets, etc., so that you can experience the joys of Cork. Even if you're not on our Cork trip coming up in August, you'll still get to Cork on Whiskey Bus number 3 if you want to. Let's test your mic now. How are you sounding?
How am I sounding? Still robotic? Not good? Oh no.
No.
Oh, no. I'm copying you. The 1
That's
hour
all right.
8 minutes.
What we'll do, Lauren, is we'll let you go and we will say goodbye to you this evening. Thank you very much for joining us as co-host again. You'll be back next week for more with us. We'll share more details of that during the week, but I will drop you off there now and I'll wrap up this evening. But thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Sláinte. Thanks, everyone.
So that's what's going on, folks. Whiskey Bus 3 launching on July 30th, as are some of our other experiences. So keep an eye out on those on the social medias, Irish Whiskey Experiences, for what's happening there, and be sure to sign up on our website. I'll put the links in the chat again. This week, again, a reminder for those of you who are members of the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club, we've got a great tour of Buayluk Distillery happening on Wednesday night. And on Friday night, we've got our tasting of our Dunville single cask with Jarlath Watson from Dunville's and from the Eccleville Distillery. And in about 12 days' time, I'm excited to announce where we're going to be going next on our club exclusive releases. And the little hint I'll give you is that it's not a million miles away from Eccleville. As simple as that. So lots going on. We'll be back to you during the week. We've only touched on the world of coopering and wood. Many of you will get a chance to experience more of the world of wood and coopering when you join us on the Whiskey Bus in Cork, because you'll be spending an afternoon with Ger Buckley, the Master Cooper, for a masterclass on wood and barrel repairs, which is going to be exciting. And we'll share more details on that as we talk more about that Whiskey Bus coming up as well. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight to our Shebeen. I have to get to a post-wedding dinner, which I'm being called to go to now. So I will love you all and leave you, and see you in our Facebook community during the week, and see you online on Wednesday night for our tour of Buayluk Distillery, and see you Friday night for our tasting of our Dunville single cask. So Sláinte, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for participating. And we'll see you all during the week. Sláinte.
Motion detected at the front.